Hello and welcome to today's video analyzing the situation of Europe's rearmament and the potential cooperative efforts that may not succeed. Today we're once again fortunate to welcome Nicholas Deco. Hello.
Hello, Xavier Teitelman.
Why are you interested in these issues?
So you know that I am an investor. I am one of the co-managers of the fund. Clarton Valeurs, which is an equity fund invested in listed stocks, is available in all your best life insurance policies. And we are notably invested in Airbus, Thales, Safran, and Dassault Aviation. And so I really need to get the most accurate idea possible of the future revenue of these companies and the orders that will be placed with them by the different governments.
That's good timing. Budgets are rising across Europe, several hundred billion euros. Maybe we can start with France.
We need to start with France. What are the trends? So if we try to project a bit further into the future, let's take, for example, the period from 2027 to 2037, so the next 2 5-year terms. Normally, we shouldn't be constrained budget-wise like we have been these past 2 years. There should be real room to maneuver. And so what has been announced in NATO's plans is an increase in defense budgets to around 3.545% of GDP. So for France, I think what's reasonable is to expect that we'll reach 4% of GDP in 2037. So where are we today? In 2026, the budget is 57 billion excluding pensions, which is about 1.8% of GDP. The current increases are around 6 to 7 billion per year, so next year we'll probably be at 64 or 65, and in 2027 we should reach 2% of GDP, which was, let's say, an intermediate goal, but we're reaching 2%. So we're starting from there and we're going to go up to 4%.
To be credible in peacetime, 2% is the minimum level. There you go.
And that's excluding pensions. Pensions are worth about 0.3, so it depends on how you count, but that makes about 65 billion next year. On that, I think the equipment budget should be above 20 billion, let's say 22 billion. Given if we take some simple assumptions about growth and inflation in 2032, so at the end of the first 5-year term, if we assume that we will increase by 0.2% per year, and so we will be at 3% in 2030 and 2032, that will bring the budget up to 111 billion. And then if we go up to 4% in 2037, that will raise the budget to 173 billion. So we go from 57 this year to 173 billion in 2037 with an inflation effect, meaning that out of those 173 billion, there is about 10 to 20% loss because of inflation. So that's a real terms multiplication of about 2.5, so that's a lot of money.
Obviously, knowing that inflation in defense equipment is higher than in the civilian sector, which is already quite a lot right now, and incidentally, being optimistic, more money will be allocated to equipment than to increases in personnel costs.
Yes, that's not absolutely certain. We'll talk about it because if we produce a lot of equipment, we'll still need quite a few people to take care of it. So yes, actually, a standard budget is 30% for equipment, roughly 10% for ammunition, 10% for infrastructure, and between 40 and 50% for payroll. Obviously, I think everyone, especially in the countries further west, will try to minimize payroll, but it's not certain that we'll succeed. A lot of systems will need a lot of people to operate them. So I prefer to stick with a 30% assumption for equipment rather than going up to 40% or 45%, which wouldn't necessarily be realistic.
Okay, because I see the Ukrainians saying that 20 to 30% of the men on the front lines could be replaced by robots as early as 2026. We'll see in a few years if that happens. But what are we actually doing with this money in France?
Exactly. So if we go with that assumption, that still makes a total defense budget over 10 years of about 1,250 billion. On that basis, I assume that we're going to spend about 120 billion on ammunition, okay? So that's a lot since we're not even at 5 billion for ammunition this year, probably just 3 billion excluding nuclear spending. So that's a big increase in ammunition spending, which I'll set aside for now, and we'll talk about equipment. If we're at about 30% for equipment, that's 450 billion in equipment over 10 years. So in that, there will be the Army, the Air and Space Force, and the Navy. So let's start with the Army. So for the Army, I'd say out of the 450, we'll spend between 80 and 100 billion.
It's the poor relation, as usual.
They get 90 billion, making them the poor relation. But that's also because land equipment naturally costs less. So what can we buy with 90 billion? So, for example, we could buy 1,000 main battle tanks. We'll discuss later whether that's necessary or realistic, but at 15 million each, that would already be 15 billion. Next, we could buy 1,000 Caesar howitzers at 6 million each, that would cost 6 billions. Then we can buy 10,000 infantry fighting vehicles at 2.5 million each. That makes 25 billion. We can buy some LRUs, so for example, 200 long-range rocket launchers to have long-range artillery. That's not very expensive. It doesn't even cost 1 billion. We can buy several hundred helicopters, 600 helicopters, so Gepard helicopters, NH-90s, Tiger Mark IIs, that cost 30 billion, so 20 million each. So the things that are expensive are infantry fighting vehicles, if we make a lot of them, and helicopters. And then we'll need infrastructure. It all depends on where we put the infrastructure budget. So those are the big items: tanks, infantry fighting vehicles, helicopters. And then there's a discussion about whether we build Baba Yaga drones. I mean, lots of different kinds of drones, etc. Is it equipment or is it consumable? Well, that's where I have a bit of trouble answering. It's pretty hard to budget for today, but those are the main platform components, let's say.
Because the Ukrainians, their ground robots that cost 20,000 euros for the most expensive ones, they're used for 3 to 6 months. Do you count them as equipment or as consumables?
For me, it's more like a consumable. It's basically like ammunition and will have to be treated as ammunition. Since I've already planned 120 billion over 10 years for ammunition, there's plenty of room for this.
It's the big heavy equipment that we look at over several decades. And alongside that, there are munitions.
The platforms, what we call platforms. And then there's a question about the army, whether, well, I think we're going to need more personnel, that's almost certain, especially if we have lots of small systems and lots of consumables. For example, bringing back national service is widely discussed, but it's expensive. If we wanted to bring back national service for an entire age group, roughly speaking, I think we'd need more than 100 billion in infrastructure, and it would cost more than 10 billion per year. So in the short term, it's not credible. In 2037, we could imagine that we'd start to have room in the budget to do that kind of thing, assuming that politically
And people
want to do.
But it's quite expensive.
If we move on now to the Air Force. The Air Force, so in this case, I've set a budget of about 180 billion, so twice as much as the Army. Today we have 130 Rafales. I'm increasing that to 250, knowing that the oldest ones need to be replaced because we want the Rafale F5. So I've planned for 180 orders, 150 million per Rafale. So that's not the unit price of the Rafale, it's more. I've budgeted more broadly, so that's 25 billion for that. Next, we get to the FCAS, which is really the big ticket item. So I've planned about 100 billion for the SCAF over the decade. And here the question is, what do we do with the FCAS? So I think that at this point there will be 2 planes. There will be a French plane and a German plane. So German Airbus, French Dassault. And for the French plane, I think the most logical thing would be to make something that would be a replacement for the Mirage 2000, but in a modernized version, an NGF in the Mirage 2000 class. So 17 tons at takeoff that could go to Magdalena. So a real interceptor, actually stealthy, with internal munitions, that can fire the Meteor, that can fire the Mika, that can launch AASM, let's say, with a small payload, 250 kilos or even 500 kilos.
But here, are we talking about manned aircraft?
Here we would be talking about piloting, yes, manned aircraft, okay. And then, after that, there you go.
So, on a program...
Brand new program, yeah, okay. A brand new program, we build it around something simple.
56 years old, we already know how to do it.
We know how to do it and use our own technologies. I don't think there's much risk of an assault on France, which would give us real air superiority. And actually, the problem with the Rafale, we've already talked about it, is that it's not stealthy, or, well, it's not stealthy. It's not as stealthy as the F-35, so that's a problem if the opposing army has stealth aircraft. I'm thinking about our Indian partners who face the Chinese and their J-20 and J-35, so they'll need a stealth aircraft. If the Chinese ever give the J-20 to the Russians, assuming the Chinese improve the J-20, I think right now the J-20's stealth isn't great yet, but in 10 years it could potentially be good. So it's not a bad idea to have planned something stealthy and agile enough to counter Chinese stealth aircraft. So there you go, it would be a simple program that wouldn't cost that much.
And with additional opportunities in India...
In this case, with opportunities in India, with opportunities in the Middle East, I think they would sell very well. I'm willing to bet that the Indians would want an assembly line fairly quickly. And that would be very complementary to the Rafale, which could last until 2050.
That reminds me of the niche the Sukhoi 75 was meant to fill, the late Sukhoi 75 that the Russians wanted to develop as a smaller Sukhoi 57, a complete failure. The Emirates, who had started to finance it, pulled out at the beginning of the war because they were disappointed by the operational results of the Russian Air Force. As a result, it could take up that position again I presented a few years ago, which I think is very good.
So it's still expensive, especially early on, since we'll spend 5 years developing before production begins. So I assume that we could produce them relatively quickly during the second 5-year term, so 2032 to 2037, so I counted 150 NGF interceptors for between 20 and 25 billion, including development costs. And then there are all the accompanying drones. I'm having trouble understanding what we're doing with the drones. It's not clear to me. But the current project for the accompanying drone, Rafale F5, sometimes I see that they're small drones. Actually, there are two choices. Either we make a heavy, expensive drone or we make light, inexpensive drones. And when I say light and inexpensive, it's a price range from 5 to 15 million.
So 10-ton class then?
That's right, 10 tons and below, or even less. This is expendable and it would be stealthy, subsonic, doing seed, but not air combat. It might be able to defend itself a little, but it doesn't do air combat.
Jamming enemy radars.
Jamming, well, lots of it all over the place, and we can afford to lose it. If we make a heavy drone, in the 15-ton category, 15 to 17 tons flying wings, subsonic, the first ones will cost 100 million and eventually it will cost 50 million each. We can't really afford to lose them anymore. Well, we can't afford to risk them.
Let's remember the program's cost relative to our production volume.
Yeah, so let's say the rule of thumb, that's what the people at Airbus say, is that when you start a program, the development cost is about the same as 100 aircraft. That means if you want the cost of the Rafale, if you have the unit cost of the Rafale, which is, let's say, 150 million, well, it's going to cost you 15 billion. 100 times 150 million. And so when you do a production run, if you do a small run of several dozen, you can't absorb those fixed costs. And here, I'm not even talking about the learning curve. I'm just talking about the cost of amortizing the development cost over several units. And so when you plan a program like this, you have to try to plan for hundreds of units. And if you can go over 1,000, that's even better.
That's going to be interesting.
It's starting to get interesting. So, let's see what we want to do. I think that if we want to make a heavy drone, we could merge them. If we go with my NGF program, we could try to combine the two, making a drone version and a piloted version that are somewhat modular. And at that point, the drone version would handle the CAD, etc., and the piloted version would handle interception. Because we're going to have AI piloting the planes, the Americans are already testing it on the F-16. So the advantage of AI is that it can withstand more than a pilot can, but on the other hand, the pilot is still superior to AI in complex situations.
But in 2035, that's not so obvious. But in that context, do we still need the NGF or more generally, the Future Combat Air System?
We'll eventually need a replacement for the Rafale, a heavier fighter bomber. The Rafale at 25 tons isn't very heavy, but is versatile and can carry a lot. But it wouldn't be bad one day to have something in the 35 to 45 ton category. So, something in the same category as the J-20, the F-22, and the F-47, which is between 40 and 45 tons. I think that by 2050 or 2060, yes, we would need something like that. But it's not urgent. I think it's more urgent to have a stealth interceptor.
Dassault, right now, it's the end of March, just announced 2 weeks ago that the idea of having a Super Rafale accompanied by a stealth combat drone would allow us to postpone the need. And that becomes a key way to delay the NGF a little further. So, potentially, there too, in your context, it's consistent with Dassault's latest announcements.
Absolutely, yes. I haven't talked to Dassault about this. I've never discussed it with them. But, well, it seems to me, actually, when you put everything down on paper, it's the most logical thing to do. That's where there's a gap. It's what costs the least. It's what we know how to do. That's it.
And the Navy?
So the Navy. Here, there's a strategic question about what we want to do with the French military. Do we want armed forces that are completely focused on the eastern flank? And at that point, we risk duplicating what Germany and Poland are doing, since they will naturally focus on the eastern flank. Or do we want something more modular that can be deployed and go to more places? I'm especially thinking about Scandinavia. For example, there could be a Russian attack in the north of Scandinavia. In that case, it's not exactly the same army that would respond as the one that would react in Poland. Potentially the Mediterranean, Southern Europe, even Romania. So I think we need a large navy. And then there's also the Asia-Pacific and the Middle East, partnership with the Middle East.
And others.
So I'm in favor of us having a real large navy. I forgot a small detail about the Air Force, which is that I would also really ramp up production on the major platforms. So I would buy a lot of MRTTs to be able to refuel. So I would go up to 60 MRTTs, I would go up to 100 A400Ms to have a really strong power projection capability. And the A400M could also be used as a bomber. Of course. There you go.
The command platforms?
The command platforms. I would buy the Swedish radar planes. I would buy 8 of them, the Global Eye. Yes, the Global Eye. So basically actually a mini American Air Force that doesn't do everything the American military does, but with the idea that they serve as a kind of rear platform to have really high-level air capabilities. We already have the platforms. We just need to build or buy them. Airbus can build them at scale, so it's not a real issue.
It's a power projection tool that complements the Navy you mentioned. Exactly.
And so if we go back to the Navy, for the Navy, I think we could go up, we have room to go up to 2 aircraft carriers. The first aircraft carrier costs $12 billion. Adding a second brings the total just over $20 billion. All right? On top of that, we would need to go up to 35 frontline warships. So we have our 8 frigates. We're starting to get the FDI, number 1, number 2. So now I think we can produce FDIs in series for the next 10 years. And at some point, I will launch a growth program. A heavy cruiser, meaning a platform bigger and heavier than the frigates, but with more than 100 vertical launch cells. So it serves as a firing platform, creating a real large air defense bubble.
But isn't it the Americans' flaw to make ships that are too big, which they can't manage to sell?
Here, the goal wouldn't be to sell it. It would really be to meet a national need and to have something where we really have a lot of anti-air interceptors to create a real large, and we can...
Don't do what the Chinese do, putting launchers on a cargo ship to keep things simple.
A platform. Yes, but actually when you make a warship, yes, because you need radars, you need a combat system, and so on. It still needs to be able to go more than 5 knots, so there you go. But this cruiser, it would really be expensive starting from 2035. But in the meantime, we can mass produce FDIs. That's what will cost the least, and we can make quite a few of them. Next, I would increase the number of naval rafales. So today we have 40 naval rafales. That's the carrier group. I would increase it to 100, so that would cost me $10 billion. There you go. Next, I would take my Mirage 2000 NG and navalize it, so it's a single-engine aircraft. At first, we would start with an M88 T-Rex the engine, well, even an M88 or M90. Actually, I would tell Dassault, you start with an M88 that delivers 9 tons of thrust, the Mirage. 2000's M53 produced 9.5 tons of thrust. It's not quite as powerful, but close. But later on, potentially, we're going to need more capacity because we'll have onboard computing. Well, that's what you were saying about the F-35 in another video. We need to provide thrust for the plane, and we also need to supply the computers. And if we put AI, a lot of AI in the plane, it will require a huge amount of power. I'd navalize my NGFs, even if they're single engine. It's not as good as a twin engine like the Rafale since you risk more, but I'm willing to accept some safety trade-offs.
You're lowering yourself to making an F-35.
I'm lowering myself to making an F-35. I'm accepting the idea of making an F-35. And also the heavy escort drones for F-5. So here I'm counting $15 billion for the SCAF, but in the naval version, drones and NGF. Next, I buy 55 maritime patrol aircraft. Well, I'd like to increase that to 55 maritime patrol aircraft. 70 helicopters, Caymans, Guépard, plus male-type drones. That comes to $10 billion. We're buying submarines again, and we'll build 6 of them. So either we make SRFs. Well, I'm being told it's complicated to restart the Suffren series. But what we can do, at least, is take the submarines we're selling to the Dutch and build 6 more on the same production line. That I counted as 10 billion TCC. And we can do that around 2033, 2034, 2035. Next, I'll raise the number of SSBNs from 4 to 6. But for that, there aren't really any expenses. That's beyond 2040.
In that case, we're not dealing with strict sufficiency anymore.
There you go. And we could have 2 SSBNs at sea permanently, so we're changing the format a bit, strengthening the nuclear side a little. Next, we need infrastructure and must decide where it fits in the budget. Because if I build 2 Pangs, 2 aircraft carriers, we need to build piers in Toulon. Potentially, it might not be a bad idea, if we have the space, to be able to host it in Brest if we want to operate in the North Atlantic. We need to extend the docks. And then there are 2 things I would do as well. I would build a base that can accommodate a full carrier strike group for an extended period. So that's really major infrastructure work on Reunion Island. And that way we have a real foothold in the Indian Ocean that we can occasionally lend to the Indians when they have carrier strike groups. And I would do the same thing in New Caledonia in case of a conflict in the
Our Guam.
Our own, but which has the advantage of being much farther away. So actually, it's both an advantage and a disadvantage. The disadvantage is that we're very far from Taiwan, so we won't be able to help. But the advantage is that we're very far away, so it's also harder to strike. If we have this foothold, we could lend it to the Australians or Americans. Well, when I say lend, I mean rent. It wouldn't be free, of course. There you go. And so that means major infrastructure work. So I estimated 25 billion, and so that makes 180 billion for the Navy. That's basically the breakdown.
It's so optimistic, but the numbers still work out.
So actually, I started from a budget envelope. I said, let's take 2%, 3%, 4% of GDP. What could we buy? Well, there you go. We can buy this and it still fits within the budget. And then you have to buy ammunition. But hey, I have an ammunition budget that's not insignificant.
They don't share our perspectives, ambitions, or global strategic visions. Who should we start with?
So the British are pretty similar, but the ones who are really different are the Germans because they have a vision of the Russian threat.
They have more money but fewer ideas.
They have a lot more money, but they've focused on a single threat, the Russian threat. They don't want to intervene everywhere in the world. So, on the other hand, in terms of budget, they were around 50 billion in recent years. Now this year, they're already above 100 billion. There's 25 billion from the special fund Scholz launched 4 years ago.
Let me remind you, it's to make up for chronic underinvestment over decades. They put in 100 billion all at once, which means they have plenty of money. Currently, it doesn't seem to be leading to anything very concrete apart from the F-35.
First of all, it's going to result in aid to Ukraine, which is already something. But it's true that going from 50 billion to over 100 billion.
When you say aid to Ukraine, it's local production that they're sending to Ukraine, which really boosts their industry, giving them a competitive advantage to eventually flood the market later on. So, it's also a move to win and eventually crush the European industry.
It's definitely an advantage behind the scenes, but a lot of it is consumables. But what I mean is, if you plan a defense strategy like that, going from 50 to 100, then 150, it's actually too fast for it to be fully effective. Our way of doing things, even though it's much slower, will be more effective, I think. So, there you go. So, think about it, even if we had the means in France, I don't think it would be smart to go straight to 100 or 120 or 150. It's better to take our time. So I think doing a more measured ramp up, and that's what will be most effective. Okay, there you go. But if we do the same exercise as we did, where we said, we're at 57 billion and we're going to go above 160 billion in 12 years or 11 years, the Germans, they're at 108. They will quickly rise to around 150, 160, 170 by 2032, and in 2037 they will be well above 200.
Around 250, that's not bad, so.
They are going to crush us, but with a very, very strong focus. And that's where actually I'm able to make a pretty good plan for France. For Germany, honestly, I'm unsure how to approach the problem or what to spend on. Their main defense contractor today is Rheinmetall. A third of their revenue today comes from munitions, so basically for Ukraine, that's 50% of their margin. That's the part that's especially profitable for Rheinmetall. Another third comes from vehicles, since Rheinmetall was once an automotive equipment supplier. So it's really very much focused on the army, the eastern flank. But honestly, if they spend 250 billion at some point, there's so much room in the budget that they'll want to do other things. And I think that's why the path of least resistance will be to say, we're going to create our own programs. We're going to spend our money on long-term programs. And by default, they'll say, actually, we're going to do it alone. We're going to do it because, in fact, there's no room for others.
Or else, non-European partnerships in this case. But I think those are questions I could get pressed on right afterward.
Yes. Anyway, that's it. All this to say that the Germans, there's a lot of money. It's not clear what they're going to spend it on. The easiest option involves using many consumables. And then after a while, launch big programs. And in particular, for example, the SCAF. They could make a heavy SCAF around 40 tons at liftoff. And that, we could say it's Airbus who does it. We leave them the architecture since that's what they actually want. For instance, I discussed this with Thales, who told me, actually, frigates, for example, people want the architecture. In general, countries want the architecture. But afterwards, to sell subsystems, for example, Thales, Holland, sells combat systems for German frigates, and that goes through without a hitch.
It's less visible.
The real fight is over the program's architecture. The industrial conflict between Dassault and Airbus comes from both wanting to be in charge, and it makes sense because commercially and industrially it's very smart to be the main architect.
Dassault was named main architect, a decision Germany now wants to contest.
But yes, as I mentioned, it's because they think they have enough money to do it themselves. Why not do it themselves? It makes sense from their view.
Because they don't have the technology to do it on their own, but that's another discussion.
So they're missing the engine. It's the engine that they're missing. For engines, there are two American manufacturers, Pratt and General Electric, as well as Safran and Rolls. So if they don't choose an American engine, the options are Safran or Rolls. So that's what I want to see. If Airbus makes a big plane, they'll need a brand new engine because the existing European engines, Rolls and Safran, are too small, they don't have enough thrust. We'll see who takes on this engine program.
In any case, France and actually Great Britain have their own sixth-generation aircraft for which we're supposed to produce the engine for this future NGF, and the British for the Tempest, which is now called the GCAP. So anyway, there will be European engines. They'll have to be European.
Yes. So the SCAF program could merge. We could imagine a merger with the program under British leadership, and so the engine manufacturer would be Rolls. But maybe the Germans will want to do their own thing, and at that point we could imagine a consortium exactly like for the A400M Safran MTU. And then if we see that this big SCAF has a Safran engine, I would consider that a French political victory.
So, you think the Germans want a SCAF more than the French, and if the French wanted it, they could work with any partner since they can fund development?
They might also decide to build their own engine from scratch. With enough money, they could do it over 15 years. At this point, it's not unimaginable.
We have half a century of research to get to that point. You need engineers, you need time.
They have engineers, they have time, they have money. It's not unthinkable. So we'll see what...
They are very optimistic over there then.
And then, where they're going to spend money is on satellites. In my whole plan, I put $30 billion for satellites. So we could, well, with all the money we have, we can do...
Is infrastructure.
For me, it's infrastructure. Whether it's material or infrastructure is debatable, but it's the Air and Space Force. But satellites are a pretty obvious place where you can spend a lot of money. It's useful because in Ukraine, when Starlink is cut off from the Russians, they're suddenly almost blind. So you can spend quite a bit of money on that. So that's what the Germans are doing. The British are much closer to us. They have a defense budget that is higher than ours, which this year is around 72 billion euros. No, that was last year. Now we're above 80, including pensions. So it's 20 billion more, but they're not more efficient than us.
It might even be less efficient. The money is not used as well.
It seems less efficient. Then, as we see things today, as we see what's happening in Iran, or when they had to send an aircraft carrier group to Cyprus, they weren't able to do it. Oh, what a sight. It seems less efficient, but I want to see for myself.
What explains this poor cost efficiency in the British military?
That's a big topic. I would say there's already a basic problem with costs. Labor costs in England are higher than in France, especially in the defense sector. And the second thing, industrially speaking, they have a major contractor, BAE Systems, which in my opinion, in terms of efficiency, is too big. It's too monopolistic to be truly efficient.
There's
not enough competition. When I see them, I feel like they're missing a bit of spark.
There are a lot of public-private partnerships that ended up being expensive.
And then almost half of BAE Systems is in the United States, working with the DoD, and the American defense industry is particularly inefficient. They spend a huge amount of money for the results they get. Well, they do get results, but I mean per dollar, and on top of that...
The dollar's inflation compared to the pound, which...
So they buy American on top of that. So that's quite inefficient in terms of spending. And then there's the British MOD, which has had a lot of indecision over the past 15 years. That, I think, contributed to the inefficiency. They started programs, they stopped them, sometimes with specs that weren't really finalized. So there you go. But if we look at the British trajectory, it's still going to look quite a lot like the French trajectory. We'll end up with a budget that, actually we have the same GDP, so we'll end up with roughly the same budget, and a defense contract that will actually look very similar. We really are, because we also want a Navy. We also want, well, that's been the case for 70 years, actually, since the end of World War II. It's really like two brothers under the same roof, France and Great Britain. And then we can also look at Scandinavia, yes, the GDPs. So they spend a lot of money. We're closer to 3% of GDP today. And so there, we're more on the front line, so it's not exactly Poland, so it's not just tanks. But they want a lot of artillery systems, planes. They're going to have Gripens, F-35s, so that's expensive for them. But also a return to conscription, a lot of drones. They're there to be ready to fight the Russians.
Is the German model 100% oriented towards the East?
It's the German model oriented towards the East.
Well, what I mean is they don't have any expeditionary intent.
With the small difference that there's still the North Atlantic on the Norwegian and Swedish side, well, Swedish and Finnish to manage. So they do have a navy, and even the Baltic Sea. Because Germany is really 100% land-based. The Scandinavians have a large maritime part, so the ships that will be able to enter the Baltic Sea, although in principle I think an aircraft carrier, on the other hand, can't enter the Baltic. We'll leave it outside. There you go. There are 25 million people in the 4 Scandinavian countries who are spending 52 billion this year. That's nearly the same budget as France, which has 3 times more people. So that's still pretty impressive.
They have the means to speed up and be efficient, yeah. Okay, we saw a broad overview. My question is, I'm coming back to the defense industry. We see that there are a lot of things that are going to happen. We see that the Europeans are going in different directions, especially the Germans on one side and the French on the other. The French, it has to be said, are the result of 70 years of effort to be sovereign, to know how to do everything and do it well. So even when we didn't produce much, we kept developing skills and have maintained those skills today. And when we say, now is the time to rearm, it feels like, especially because of the Germans, everyone is turning their backs on us saying, well, no, we're going to go with the Germans to create programs that compete with what already works and is already operational in France. Do you agree with this observation?
No, I'm not absolutely sure. Well, when you say others, do you mean Europeans or outside of Europe?
European countries, for example, in air defense have Aster 30 missiles, the best in Europe. Only the Patriot in the United States is comparable. Instead of simply buying, pressing the button, developing and producing lots of SAMP-T and lots of Aster 30 missiles, the Germans are launching a European consortium, Sky Shield, which will compete with what we're already doing in France by using American technologies.
Personally, I think the problem with SAMP-T, if you take that example, is that we're not producing enough interceptors. We're not producing enough Aster missiles. Oh, really? Yes, well, that's really the problem with MBDA. That is to say, actually, we have a lot of technologies, we have a lot of systems that are quite limited in quantity, and when clients come, well, it's easier to get an Aster today, some Asters, than to get Patriots. But if you want Asters now, you won't get them right away. You'll get them in 2029. So to me, that's the problem with SAMP-T today. Actually, we should invest in greater production capacity or also simplify the systems. We could create a simpler, more basic Aster. And then, if we can produce in volume, maybe people will be more interested in getting them.
But maybe they could come on board. Instead of starting a new program to do what the French did, that's what I'm suggesting. Maybe we could develop partnerships.
But instead of others, the French, we've always been a bit on our own. Since de Gaulle, we've gone our own way. So we have this reputation for being a bit on the sidelines and for making systems that aren't numerous enough. And so, actually, the day you need them, you won't have the volume. What happened in Iran is really the best example. We're in the United Arab Emirates with our Rafales, and after shooting down the Shaheds with Mika missiles, we ran out of Mikas in 3 days.
We destroyed 60 Shaheds.
Mikas are great, Rafalas are great, but we only lasted 3 days. So for me, that's the thing we need to fix if we really want people to come back to us. Our systems are great, but we must scale up production for high volume.
I'm referring to German partnerships aiming to catch up with technologies already nearly operational in France. They're teaming up with Kratos for the stealth combat drone. They're teaming up with Enderil to make cruise missiles. They're teaming up with Newell to make interceptor missiles. They're buying from Boeing instead of Airbus, even though France is buying the Airbus Maritime Patrol aircraft.
Honestly, I don't understand why. The Maritime Patrol aircraft, since it's from Airbus, they're not even buying their own plane. It's also their plane. The Airbus A321 MPA. I think the path of least resistance for the Germans, there's so much money once again that they're going to want to have industrial and economic benefits. And the path of least resistance is to do the programs on their own. So actually there will be duplication. In my opinion, that's inevitable. What you see right now, there will be more of it. They're going to want to do their own program, a bit in every segment. On the other hand, where we can work together, I think it's on the subsystems. For the architecture, they'll have their own, but may buy many subsystems from us, and we'll buy subsystems from them too. But Germany, with the money they're going to spend, it's inevitable that they'll say, actually, we want these to be our programs, or we want to be the ones in charge of these programs.
And so there's a threat of being overwhelmed by the Germans in 10 to 15 years. How do we manage to hold on? What do we do? I've brought this up several times on my channel. Do we form a big partnership with, obviously, Belgium, with Poland, with Greece? I think we can get along well with these countries.
I think we need to be aggressive commercially. We have to try to find common ground with Germany. Historically, our best clients have still been outside of Europe. I think that's still our own hunting ground that we need to keep. If there's a strategic partnership to pursue, it will be with India. So we need to work with the Indians, give them production capabilities. That is, if we make an NGF, as I was saying, in the 17-ton category, they might want an assembly line. We give them the assembly line. I trust Dassault to negotiate it. I have no worries.
In this case, even for tanks, the Indians aim to set up a Leclerc tank assembly line with Romania. We could eventually resume serious work on these programs, not necessarily with European partners.
Actually, we could do both. In fact, we just need to have our own plan, our own programs. Right now, it's just a plan on paper. And then it's just like making a request for proposals, asking who's interested in having something in this program and contributing, and then we handle it case by case.
Come on, it's an investment plan, sir. Exactly. Guys, let's thank Altaris for hosting us today for this video. Nicholas, we'll put all the links in the comments of this video so people can check out your fund, your work, your other talks, and your research papers.
I don't write research papers.
That's okay. They're analysis notes. No.
No, not even that. We don't talk. We just buy and sell stocks. That's it.
Ah, but you do talk after all.
Here. Only here.
We hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you very soon.